any industry today, and you will see two groups of people. The first group is busy building their brand. The second group is busy building their skill. The first group is much more visible. The second group is much more capable. And over time, only one of these groups builds a career that holds together. And here's the truth. The order matters. Skill comes first. Brand comes second. Get the order wrong, and you spend years building a reputation for things you cannot actually do, which collapses the first time somebody examines what's behind the marketing. Get the order right, and the brand builds itself slowly from the actual capability that the years of unglamorous work produced. Most ambitious adults are running the order backwards. They think the brand is the path to the opportunities. The opportunities are the path to the skill development, and somehow it all works out. It doesn't. The opportunities, when they arrive, go to the people who can actually do the work. And the brand-first crowd is left with visibility that doesn't translate into anything real. The visibility was the substitute. The substitution doesn't hold. You see, this is one of the most expensive mistakes ambitious people make. The years they spend on visibility could have been years spent on actual competence. By the time they realize the order was wrong, the years are gone. And rebuilding takes longer than just building correctly would have taken in the first place. Listen, today I want to walk you through 5 things you must understand about this. By the end, you'll see why most of the loud people in your industry are not the ones actually getting hired for the work that matters. And you'll see what would be required starting tomorrow to be one of the quiet builders whose career compounds while everybody else's brand is still searching for its next angle. I'm telling you, this is one of the most important sequence questions a developing professional can face. Get it right, and the decades work for you. Get it wrong, and the decades work against you, no matter how impressive the early years looked. Now, before we get into the 5 things, you must understand what the brand-first approach has been costing you if you've been running it. Because most people who build their brand prematurely don't see the cost. They see the visibility. They see the followers. They see the conversations they're being included in. They don't see what's slowly happening underneath. Here's the truth. Every hour you spend on visibility before the underlying skill is in place is an hour stolen from the skill development that would have actually produced something to be visible about. You're trading the foundation for the facade. The trade feels reasonable in the short term. The facade is more impressive. The cost shows up over years when the facade has nothing behind it and the foundation never got built. You see, the years between 25 and 35 or between 35 and 45 are the prime skill development decades. If you spend them on visibility instead of capability, you can't get them back. The brain plasticity, the time available, the energy to do deliberate practice, those are concentrated in specific life stages. Miss the stage, and you can't redo the development as efficiently later. But here's what most brand-first people discover, eventually. The visibility they built is not transferable. It works as long as the current angle is hot. The moment the industry shifts, or the platform changes, or somebody else with the same shallow expertise but better marketing arrives, the visibility evaporates. There's nothing underneath to sustain it. The skill, which would have been the actual asset, was never built. You can't fake skill forever. The faking has a shelf life. Eventually, somebody asks you to actually do the thing. Eventually, your work is examined by people who know the difference between marketed expertise and real capability. Eventually, the gap between your brand and your skill produces a moment of public exposure that is hard to recover from. You must take this seriously, because the brand first path has been sold as the modern way to build a career. And for most people, it produces the opposite of what they hoped. They end up known for not very much, instead of unknown for something substantial. And the unknown but substantial version has a much higher ceiling, because the skill keeps producing for decades, while the brand first visibility fades the moment the next trend arrives. 5 things, all about the right sequence. Skill, deeply built. First, brand, naturally emergent. Second, the order is not arbitrary. The order determines everything downstream. You see, this is something you can verify by looking around. The people in your field who have done the work for 20 years and are still relevant, almost all of them built skill first. The people who flamed out, who had big early visibility and then disappeared, almost all of them had the order reversed. The pattern is consistent. The first thing you must understand is why so many ambitious people get the order wrong. It isn't because they're stupid. It is because the brand is much more visible than the skill. And visibility creates a feedback loop that the slower skill building never gets to create. You see, when you work on your brand, you get immediate feedback. Followers, comments, conversations, invitations. Each interaction provides a small dose of confirmation that you're on the right track. The dopamine arrives daily. The work feels like it's producing results because there are visible signals being produced. When you work on your skill, the feedback loop is much slower. The work is private. The progress is invisible. The improvements are small and accumulate gradually. There are no daily signals. There is no audience. There is just you, alone, doing the unglamorous work of getting incrementally better at something for months, then years. And here's the truth. The brain prefers the fast feedback loop. The brain is calibrated evolutionarily to do things that produce visible results soon. So the brain pulls you toward the brand work, away from the skill work. The pulling feels reasonable. The reasoning is, see, the brand work is working. Look at all this engagement. Meanwhile, the skill work would have been the foundation of a real career, but it gets postponed indefinitely because it doesn't pay back the way the brand work does. The mistake is to follow the dopamine. The dopamine is pointing at the wrong target. The visible signals aren't real progress, they're just signals. And signals without underlying substance produce a career that looks impressive from the outside, but can't sustain itself when the conditions change. You got to deliberately resist the brand first pull, especially in your 20s and 30s. You can have some visibility. You don't have to be invisible. But the bulk of your hours have to go into the skill work, regardless of how little visible feedback that work produces in the short term. You have to learn to find satisfaction in private progress that nobody else sees yet, because that's the only kind of progress that actually compounds. You must train yourself to be okay with the invisibility. The brand first people will look like they're winning while you're still building. They aren't winning. They're collecting visibility that has no foundation. By the time the foundation matters, usually around year 5 to 7, the patterns reverse. You start to be sought out for the real work. They start to be passed over because the work requires more than the marketing taught them. The order is skill first, brand second. This requires resisting the immediate gratification of visibility for the longer-term satisfaction of substance. The few who manage it produce careers that everybody else, with their early visibility, eventually realizes they cannot match. The second thing you must see clearly is what happens to a brand that gets built before the skill is in place. It collapses. Not always dramatically, sometimes quietly, but it collapses because a brand without substance can't continue to produce the substance the brand claims to represent. You see, every brand makes implicit promises. The personal brand of an expert promises that the person can actually do the expert work. The brand of a thought leader promises that the person has thoughts that lead. The brand of a builder promises that the person can build. And every time the brand bearer is called on to deliver in a project, a presentation, a real-world test, the brand is being checked against the substance. If the substance is there, the brand holds. The check confirms what the brand claimed. The reputation continues, supported by reality. If the substance isn't there, the brand starts to fail, slowly, and then suddenly. The first few times somebody encounters the gap, they might forgive it. They might think it was a bad day, an unusual case. But after several encounters, the pattern becomes clear. The brand was empty. The reputation built on appearance cannot withstand examination. Here's the truth. The collapse usually happens in your 40s. The brand you built in your 20s and 30s on the promise of expertise you didn't yet have runs into the limit. The opportunities you wanted, the roles you positioned for, the income level your visibility suggested, they all require you to actually do something at a high level. And if you can't, the visibility starts to work against you. The brand first people in their 40s are often quietly stuck. They have name recognition without the underlying capability. They get invited to things, but not the most consequential things. They have followers, but not the kind of professional standing that produces real money or real impact. And rebuilding the actual skill at 45, with all the responsibilities that come with that age, is much harder than building it would have been at 30. And the collapse isn't always public. Sometimes it's just the slow realization in the brand first person's own mind that they are not actually as good as their marketing has suggested. That realization eats away at the inside, even when the outside still looks fine. They know themselves that the brand is bigger than the substance. The knowing is exhausting. The performance has to be maintained against the internal awareness that the performance is mostly a performance. You don't want to be there at 45. You don't want the brand and skill gap to be the thing you are quietly carrying. You want them to match. The way to make sure they match is to build them in the right order. Skill first, brand second. Then the brand reflects something real, and the gap that produces the collapse never opens up in the first place. The third thing, and this is what most people don't yet believe, is that a deeply developed skill generates its own brand. You don't have to market hard if your work is genuinely better than the work around you. The skill speaks, the brand follows. And the brand that emerges from real skill is much stronger than any brand you could have built directly. You see, in every industry, there are people who are quietly, dramatically better at the work than everybody else. They don't have huge profiles. They don't have impressive marketing. They don't have elaborate brand strategies. They just do the work at a level that is hard to miss once anybody is paying attention. And over years, the work itself produces their reputation. Here's the truth. The work is the brand, not the marketing about the work. The work itself. Word travels. People who needed the kind of work this person does eventually find out about them. The referrals start. The opportunities arrive, not as a flood, like a brand first launch, as a steady increasing trickle year after year that eventually becomes a stream, then a river. The brand that emerges this way has properties the brand first version doesn't have. It is durable. It survives industry changes. It survives platform changes. It survives the rise and fall of trends. Because the underlying skill is what people are responding to, and the skill stays valuable across changing conditions. But here's the gift. The brand that emerges from skill has credibility that the brand first version can't match. When you've built your reputation on actual work that other people have witnessed and benefited from, your endorsements carry weight. Your recommendations get implemented. Your suggestions get taken seriously. Because there's substance behind the words. The market knows the difference. You got to trust this process, even when it feels slow. The skill is going to produce the brand. You don't have to push it. You don't have to manufacture it. You don't have to build elaborate marketing systems. You just have to do the work at a high enough level that people who encounter it notice. Over years, the noticing accumulates into a reputation. The reputation, once established, runs on its own. This is hard for people who have absorbed the cultural lesson that you have to market yourself constantly to be known. The lesson is partly right. Some level of being known is helpful. But the constant marketing approach is far less effective than the skill-first approach. Because the skill-first approach produces the kind of being known that actually produces opportunities, while the constant marketing approach often produces visibility that doesn't translate into anything substantive. You gotta trust the skill. Let it speak. The brand follows. And the brand that follows is the kind that holds for decades instead of fading the moment the marketing budget runs out. The fourth thing is what the skill building years actually feel like from the inside, because they're nothing like the brand first years. The brand first years feel exciting, visible, validating. The skill building years feel slow, invisible, and often discouraging. And it's the willingness to stay in the slow phase, while the brand first people seem to be racing ahead, that separates the people who eventually build something real from the people who get stuck in early visibility. Let me tell you about a woman I once knew. She was in her late 20s when I met her. She was just starting out in a competitive industry, and she had a choice to make. The same choice that most ambitious 20-somethings face in any industry. She could spend her time building visibility, writing pieces, doing talks, growing her presence, getting on panels, or she could spend her time deepening her actual craft, training, deliberate practice, doing the harder, less visible work of getting really good at the thing. Most of her peers chose visibility. It was the obvious move. Everybody was doing it. The visibility produced immediate signals, invitations, conversations, social rewards. The skill building work, by comparison, looked invisible and slow. She resisted, partly because of her temperament. She was somebody who preferred depth to performance, partly because she had an intuition that the visibility first approach was somehow off. She decided deliberately to spend her first 5 years on the skill, with some visibility, but not as the main thing. The main thing would be the work itself. The first year was hard. Her peers seemed to be passing her. Their followers were growing. Their bylines were appearing. Their names were getting around. She was working quietly on becoming actually good at the work. Nobody was noticing. The dopamine that her peers were getting from their visibility wasn't available to her. She doubted herself often in those early years. She would see one of her peers get an opportunity she had wanted and feel a familiar pang. She was clearly not doing what they were doing. And what they were doing was producing visible results. Maybe she was wrong about the order. But she stayed with her decision. Year 2 passed, year 3. By year 4, her skill was noticeably different from her peers. She could do things they couldn't do. The work she produced was at a level theirs wasn't approaching. But still, the brand first peers had bigger followings, more visible markers of success. By external measures, she still looked like she was behind. Then year 5 happened. The pattern started to reverse. The opportunities her peers had been chasing, the consequential ones, the ones that required actually doing the work, those opportunities started coming to her, not the surface level visibility opportunities, the real ones. Because somebody on the other side had to actually use the work, and the work she produced was demonstrably better than what her peers were producing. By year 7, the gap between her and her peers was substantial and visible to everybody. She had become the recognized expert in their corner of the industry. Her peers, with their bigger early followings, were still struggling for the consequential work because their marketing had outpaced their skill. The market eventually noticed. The market always notices. And then the brand started building itself. The clients she did work for talked about her. The referrals came in. The invitations to write and speak arrived. Not because she had pursued them, but because she had become somebody whose voice on the topic was worth hearing. Within 10 years, she was a name in her industry, with a brand that her peers couldn't catch, because their brands had no underlying substance to match. She told me years later, the 5 years of unglamorous skill work were the hardest of my career. The brand first years that followed were the easiest, because by then the skill was doing all the work. I just had to keep showing up. The brand built itself because the skill could not be ignored once the right people saw it. The 5th thing is what happens over the long run, when you compare the brand first careers with the skill first careers. 20 years out, the gap between the two paths is not subtle. It is enormous. And almost none of it goes in the direction the brand first people thought it would when they were getting their early visibility. You see, brands without substance fade. They have a half-life. Whatever made the brand work in year 3 doesn't work in year 10. The angle that was fresh gets stale. The platform that was hot becomes the old platform. The personal narrative that resonated stops resonating. And the brand first person has to keep finding new angles, new narratives, new platforms, just to maintain the same level of visibility. The brand requires constant maintenance because there's nothing underneath holding it up. The brand built on real skill, by contrast, requires almost no maintenance. The work keeps producing. The reputation keeps compounding. The relationships keep deepening. Year 10 is not a struggle to stay relevant. It is the year the foundation of work you built starts paying serious returns. Year 20 is when those returns are larger than anything the brand first people will ever see. Here's the truth. The brand built on real skill is the only kind that lasts. It is the only kind that survives the inevitable changes in industry, technology, taste, platform. Because what's underneath it is not the changing surface conditions. It is the actual capability of the person, which keeps being valuable across whatever surface conditions emerge. I am telling you, the people you respect most in any field are almost always people who built skill first and brand second. The ones who reverse the order are rarely the ones whose names persist. they had their moment. The moment passed. The substance that would have kept them relevant was never built, and so they faded while the deeper skilled people who had been quietly working the whole time kept rising. You must orient your career around becoming one of the deep skilled people. Not because the deep skilled approach is easier, it's harder in many ways, but because it is the only approach that produces a career you can sustain across decades. The brand first approach is a sprint that ends. The skill first approach is a long walk that keeps going. The long walk requires patience, years of low visibility while you build, resistance to the temptation to start marketing before the substance is there. Trust that the work itself is producing the reputation, even when no one is yet noticing. And then, when the recognition finally arrives, it is real recognition of real work by real people who needed exactly what you've been quietly becoming capable of. That kind of recognition, once earned, is permanent. The brand first recognition is not. The difference is the substance underneath. Build the substance first, the recognition follow. So here is the inversion you must make. Stop trying to build your brand before you've built the skill that the brand is supposed to represent. The brand first approach is one of the most expensive mistakes ambitious people make. The reverse order, skill first, brand second, is what produces the careers that actually last. The mechanics in practice are simple. You orient most of your hours around becoming actually capable at your work. Deliberate practice, hard projects, real feedback, working at the edge of what you can currently do. Every single day, the work is mostly invisible. Every single day, the progress is mostly slow. Every single day, you stay with it anyway, because the slow private progress is what's actually producing capability. You don't abandon visibility entirely. You can do some marketing, you can do some networking, you can put your work out there in moderate doses, but the bulk of your time, especially in your 20s and 30s, goes to the skill, not to the brand. The proportion is roughly 80% skill, 20% visibility in the early years. Then it might shift to 70-30 as the skill matures, but never to the brand first ratio that most ambitious people run. And you have to accept the invisibility while it lasts. You have to watch your brand first peers seem to race ahead without following them. You don't follow them. You stay with the work. You trust that the work is producing something that can't be produced any other way. And you give it the years it actually requires. Not 3 months, not 6 months, but 3 to 7 years of focused skill development before the brand building work starts to make sense. Around year 5, the patterns start to shift. People who need real work start finding you. The brand first peers start asking how you got there. The opportunities that require actual competence flow toward you. You're no longer behind. You're ahead in a way the brand first people can't catch up to without doing the very years of work they skipped. And by year 10, the question of whether to focus on the brand is moot. The brand is building itself because the skill is producing work that gets talked about. Every single day after that point, you can lean into visibility now, if you want, because the visibility will be reinforced by substance. The substance is the asset. The visibility is just the channel through which the substance reaches the people who need it. That's the whole reframe. Skill first, brand second. Both, eventually, but only in that order. The order is not negotiable. Run it backwards, and the brand collapses. Run it correctly, and the brand emerges naturally from work that can't be ignored. So here is what I want you to carry with you. Most ambitious people in your industry are getting the order wrong. They are building brand before skill. And the brand they build will eventually collapse because there is nothing underneath it to sustain it. You don't have to make the same mistake. You must pick the skill that matters most for your career, the deep skill, the one that 10 years of work into it would make you genuinely capable in a way that almost nobody else is. You must then spend the next 5 to 7 years getting actually good at it. Not famous for it, good at it. Most of your hours, every single day, deliberate practice, hard projects, real feedback. The unglamorous work of becoming the real version of what most people are only marketing themselves as. I am telling you, this is the rarest move in modern, ambitious life. The cultural pressure is enormous to do the opposite. To market first, build later. To position before you can deliver. To brand the imagined version of you instead of becoming the real one. Resist that pressure. The few who do become the people whose work is genuinely sought after. The years of skill building are hard. The invisibility is real. The doubt is real. You will watch peers who chose visibility seem to race ahead. They aren't racing ahead. They are collecting visibility that has no foundation. You are building the foundation that in 10 years will be the only thing that matters. I am telling you, by year 5, the patterns start to reverse. By year 10, you're somebody whose work people seek out. By year 20, your career compounds in a way the brand first crowd could never have produced because their early visibility couldn't transition into the real work the later years require. The order is skill first, brand second. The order produces the career. The order produces the income. The order produces the reputation that lasts. And the order requires you to spend the years that follow this seminar quietly doing work that nobody is yet watching. Because the substance you're building during those years is the only kind of substance that matters in the long run. You got to start the deep skill work today. Trust the order. The brand follows. And the years of quiet building in retrospect become the years that produced everything good that came afterward. You cannot rush this. You cannot shortcut it. The skill development takes the years it takes, and nothing replaces the time. The brand first people who try to skip the years end up paying for it, eventually, with a career that cannot sustain itself. The skill first people who paid the years up front end up with a career that runs on its own. Pick the version that lasts. Start tomorrow. The quiet years are the foundation. The visible years come later, and they come because of what you built when nobody was looking. That work done in the quiet years is what your eventual career stands on. Nothing else holds. Nothing else can. The skill is the foundation. The brand is the building above it. Build the foundation deep. The building above it can rise as tall as you want then. The order is not optional. The order is everything. Get it right today, and the next 20 years compound into a career you cannot yet imagine from where you stand. Get it wrong, and you'll be one of the brand first people in 20 years wondering why the work has stopped coming.